Okay. I'm being asked by James to explain a little bit about what is fat, and out of that, what is good fat versus bad fat. Fat has been vilified for the last 30 to 40 years to a point that many older women and men refuse to eat anything that have fats in it, including any oils. Oil and fat with being synonymous, so that they don't consume any oil-related products. But anyway, in the last around 5 years or so, we're beginning to find out that fats are quite beneficial to our body. In fact, on certain diseases, you need to eat more fat in order to compensate for eating less carbohydrates. For example, in diabetes. So for diabetic, you need to eat more fat, less carb, and a little bit more protein and vegetable in order to normalize your glucose level. But today we are going to go ahead and talk about good versus bad. Fat by itself is a very important in two reasons or two factors. One of them being that it's compositions or structural component of a cell wall. The cell wall are made with amino acid and fatty acid, amino acids, fatty acids. So this structure is very important, and you have to have the right amount of certain fat and certain what we call omega-3, long-chain omega-3 components, EPA and DHA, in order for the cell to function properly. For the cell wall to function properly, it must have all these combinations of what we call good, quote unquote, good fat components in order for the cell and then the organ to function properly. What will happen is that in the past, people think that saturated fat is bad for you, and unsaturated fat is good for you. And vegetable, since unsaturated oil is mostly vegetable, so they partially hydrogenated vegetable oil to make it into trans fat, what we call trans fat. And it turned out trans fat is even worse than saturated oil, and that saturated oil is not really that bad for you after all. So we are having all kind of turnaround or controversial surrounding what type of fat you should be eating. So what happens when you don't have a good cell membrane? Well, it doesn't hold water as well. It does not diffuse in the vital nutrients, electrolytes, and one of the most, to me, important thing is they don't communicate with each other well. So, and slowly in between them, the cell not functioning properly. A good example would be like the insulins are not being, the insulin receptor site are not very sensitive to insulin. All these are part and parcel of cell membrane functions that is impeded if your membrane is not properly constructed with the proper amount of fat or fatty acid. So the diet we ate consists of fat that our body needs, and that's why we call them essential oil. Omega-6 and omega-3 are considered to be essential oil. Our body cannot manufacturing it. We have to eat and ingest some of these oil into our body, and from then on we'll convert it into some long-chain omega-3, which is made into the composition of your cell wall. Or you can eat fish, long-chain omega-3 from the fish, incorporated into a fish shell, cell wall. Fats are very important to our cell membrane wellness, if you call it healthiness. And by then, how do I say that it determines the healthiness of your organ and in turn the healthiness of your body. So oil, fat are very important part of our diet that we need to ingest to ensure that we have good health of our body. And what we then had to find out, what are the relatively good oil that we can eat, or oil or fat, and not so good oil that we should be avoiding, not eating as much, I should say. So most of the good oil that we're talking about from the plant, okay, plant-based omega-3 oil, from the nuts and seeds, olive oil. We all know about the olive oil being good for you. Avocado oil, canola oil, and some other nuts oil like macadamia nuts oil. So those are some of the good fat, and we can also have some good fat coming from the alpha-linoleic acid, which is the omega-3 fatty acid, precursor to the long-chain omega-3 acid. So these are found in flaxseed oil, walnut, chia seed, canola oil, some soy oil, and sunflower oil. Okay, so we find some good oil in this area, and really good oil, or to us, without having to convert them. These are good source of EPA and DHA. These are coming from the long chain omega-3 oil. Most of them come from cold fish, cold water fish such as salmon, tuna, mackerel, and fish oil supplement. They did not mention here is that actually all EPA and DHA are manufactured by tiny algae. And algae are being consumed by little fish, and little fish consumed by bigger fish, and they accumulate up the food chain. And some of the fish have accumulated EPA and DHA. Actually, when we call fish oil are actually coming from algae. We are beginning to use algal oil as another supplement. And just recently, US FDA approved a canola oil, genetically modified canola oil that will produce long chain EPA and DHA. So that will become a very wide source available EPA and DHA, so that we don't put so much pressure on the fish that we overfish and overconsume. There are some other, we call them medium chain saturated oil. These are mostly by coconut oil. And what many people don't realize, in the animal will be considered to be bad fat or saturated fat, actually contain a part of it omega-3 oil, long chain omega-3 oil. In the past, the animal will go out and eat grass, and the grass have omega-3 oil, the short chain one. The body would switch it to long chain omega-3 and save some of this in their fat. When we talk about organic free-range chicken and egg, or grass-fed meats and dairy product, they almost always contain larger amount of omega-3 oil. So here's another area you need to balance out. I eat some of the say meat with some saturated fat, but in return I have some omega-3 oil also on top. Wild salmons is another one that will get you lots of these good oils. So where do we find the bad oils? Out in the supermarket and in bakeries. So the term when you see a partially hydrogenated vegetable oil, that's the term for trans fat, and that's the term for bad fat. This is the worst kind of fat our body can have. Unfortunately, all meat, all eggs, all these called dairy products has small amount of trans fat. So we always have small amount of trans fat in our body, but the largest amount of trans fat is from man-made Crisco, like shortening, margarine. That type of man-made fats are not the best for us. So you can see that in lots of baked goods, cookies and icings and crackers. So you've got to read your label carefully to find out, do they have partially hydrogenated oil? And because they know that trans fat is no good, so they kind of try to hide the name trans fat from the label. And in US, they just come up to say that you will not be allowed to use trans fat within such a month. But anyway, I think all around the world, people would know that trans fat was no good for you, and they are eliminating trans fat in their diet. So there are other bad fat. It's not really bad fat in the sense that it's still an essential part. It's called omega-6 oil. Omega-6 oil and omega-3 oil, the ratio need to be at a certain level. In the past, the ratio of omega-3 and omega-6 is 1:1. But now omega-6 to omega-1 in America is something like 16:1. So everywhere you go in a restaurant, in anywhere, they don't use omega-3 oil, but they mostly use omega-6 oil. So like corn oil, cottonseed oil, grapeseed oil, and saffron oil, those are all contain large amount of omega-6. They are not necessarily bad for you, except you have to make it into a right amount of ratio between omega-6 and 3. And once you balance it out, both oils are equally good for you. There are other oxidative fat. So fried food, barbecue meat. Okay, not only they are oxidized, they taste good. Even though vegetable oil is good, but because you fry them in high temperature with some kind of meat in it, it oxidizes those meat or carbohydrate, and that produce many of chemicals that's no good for you. Long chain saturated fat, meaning butter, lard, oil, like bacon grease and all that. It used to be said that these are no good for you, even though they taste yummy when you cook it into your dishes. But it's beginning to say that these are not so bad after all. A small amount of it is okay to ingest. If you're going to find long chain saturated fat, you'll be better off if you can find a grass-fed beef, okay, which will contain saturated oil, long chain saturated oil, but also some amount of omega-3 oils in it. Dairy product and poultries from free-range chicken, then they have a higher amount of omega-3 oil. The conventional raising of the livestock also reduce the amount of good omega-3 oils within this livestock. So you have to compensate that by balancing the omega-6 and omega-3. So these two are constant battles. We need to eat more oil in order for us to cut down, in order for the cell membrane to be healthy. But on certain diseases, you really need to think about eating more of the oil to upset so that you will not be as hungry, and not eating as much carbohydrate, particularly refined carbohydrate. I am particularly talking about diabetes patients and patients who want to lose weight and have to go on special diet. For that purpose, they have to eat more oil and less amount of carbohydrate. Even though diabetes and weight loss have two different purposes, they are not eating to be healthy, but they're eating to counter the disease. So one case is diabetes, the other case is overweight. So in that sense, I'll stop here and finish this topic about good oil and bad oil. But overall, oil are good for you, and it's turning out carbohydrate, particularly refined carbohydrate and sugar, is worse off than the oil. So the latest finding has supported that sugar is just as bad for you, and oil is not really that bad for you.